Adam, Cori, thank you so much for coming together and kind of spending some time with me this morning. I would like to start right out of the gate with tell me about StrataPT. Now, Adam, you and I go way back, way back. But I would love to hear kind of the origin story of StrataPT, where it came from, how it got started, where it's grown to its place in the market today. So just any history you're willing to share, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, no, that sounds great and good. Appreciate taking the time to meet with us here this morning, Tony. Yeah, going way back history. Again, as you're well aware of, when my wife Kim, when she was working in the outpatient setting, helping to run your clinics in Florida and Ohio. At that time there was a lot of, she was wearing a lot of hats, of course, as you know, and it really just saw the need in terms of being able to help do a lot of the same things she helped your practice with in terms of managing the billing and managing a lot of the administrative, just day-to-day operations, all the different hats it takes to run a practice. Just really saw the need to be able to help even more practices, and a lot of that, starting off when StrataPT started back in 2010 as a billing revenue cycle management company at its core, really, and just really, and at that time, 10 years ago, 13 years ago, I guess now, it seemed like the billing wasn't, it was complex, but it's nothing like it is here in 2023, and I think for the first couple of years, helping practices really manage the billing, collect every dollar that's owed, and just, but she quickly also realized that practices were using multiple systems to manage their schedule, do documentation, so a lot of different pieces. So that kind of kicked off brought on a couple engineers back in 2012 to really start to build what Strata EMR is today. And I think really the subtle but really important difference when you look at the EMR is that it's what we call billing aware, and it was really built around the idea of how do we leverage technology to help facilitate a clean claim process. Because to be honest, candidly, without that, that EMR, we wouldn't be able to drive such a high collection rate. We wouldn't be able to manage the billing at such a high success rate that we do, because we looked and said we can either hire more people, and there's always that room for human error there, or we, leverage better technology. So over the past really 13 years, the last 10 years in particular, it's just been a consistent focus on how do we consistently solve problems for practice owners, allow them to use a single system supported by a single company without a whole bunch of integration dependencies, without a bunch of bolt-ons. And that's really what we've done, continue to build out the technology, at its core, again, focusing on the billing, revenue cycle management, getting providers paid every dollar they're owed, and I think, I'm sure you agree, we've seen a lot of the changes in the industry, with some of these commercial payers in particular, and it's like, holy smoke, what's the flavor of the week here in terms of, figuring out another reason not to pay a claim. So, it's just it's been a labor of love in terms of continuing to build out the EMR. At its core, clinical documentation, scheduling, practice management, what are the core functions of the EMR. That's, of course, those features and, a lot of the different features that you see in a lot of the EMRs are there. But again, that subtle but important difference is having, that billing aware piece of real-time feedback, reimbursement warnings. How do we take a lot of the back end, middle and back end, revenue cycle management piece and bring it to the front end from a clinician, just to be able to, again, try high clean claim rate, low denial rates, high reimbursement, so on and so forth. So I can go on and on for hours on it. Let me stop there. Happy to go into any other details behind that.
I heard you use the term billing aware. I've heard you used to use that term before. I've never heard anybody else use that term. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about what you guys are doing is, I don't know anybody else in the marketplace who's doing it the way you're doing it. In other words, you're charging for the billing and collection service, but you're providing the EMR for free. And it's one of those things where I haven't really been following the story of StrataPT for years now. And when you guys kind of popped back up on the radar, I was like, well, what's going on? What's different? Why is this unique? And I look at the landscape, I look at all the other billing companies out there. And something that I've always said in my world is I want therapists to understand how to do the billing. I know you guys see it probably every single day, probably more often than me. But you hear the same story over and over. There's a private practice owner, they're killing themselves, they're treating patients, their schedules are full. but they don't understand the billing. They don't know where the money is. They don't know what's going on. And the worst scenario is their billing company went out of business. They stopped communicating. Nobody knows what happened to them. And now all of a sudden there's 50, 60, 70,000 in AR that's just sitting out there, and the therapist has no idea how to even access it. So with I teach a course, it's how to do Medicare billing. It's a really simple, basic course. But the reason why I started doing that was because I would see therapists in a position of vulnerability. And even when therapists would talk to me about, well, should I do it in-house? Should I outsource it? Until you guys kind of came around, I would always say you have to do it in-house, because the odds are your billing company is going to go out of business. There are so many really just like they're barely hanging on. But when I talked to Paul, when I talked to your CEO, when I started researching you guys again, this now opened a new opportunity for me to say, hey, now there is something that I genuinely believe is going to be around. Your guys' focus on technology, your integration between the billing, the collections, the software, kind of putting it all together. I do think that it provides a unique position in the marketplace that nobody else is really going in that direction. So that being said, for people watching, people listening, give me an idea of kind of who's the ideal candidate. I know you can serve lots of different providers, but in the dream scenario, who's the person sitting at home right now who's like, I need to reach out to these guys. I need to know what they can offer because I'm not getting what I need. Like, who's the perfect business for you?
Yeah, great question, Tony. And I think, there's a lot of different things you mentioned there. But to answer your question directly, I think, first of all, we stayed focused on physical, occupational, and speech therapy. So over the years, we haven't gone beyond those disciplines. But I think really, when we look at a very specific, and a lot of the conversations we have with practice owners that are reaching out, they are highly emotional conversations because they are in a very vulnerable state. They're in a position where they haven't been able to take a vacation for the past 10 years. They haven't been able to give their employees a raise. They haven't, and that's really the difference when you look at from a collection rate. Their collection rates are 50, 60, 70% at best. When you look at that's the difference between being profitable and not for a lot of these practice owners. So, I think that's really when you look at the ideal practice and the ones that we just love being able to help. It's those that are reaching out in a position where they don't have the domain experience in the billing to be able to feel confident bringing in-house, number one. But they're also in a position, it's like, man, how do I, but a lot of times their only option they feel like is, I just need to bring this in-house because what else do I do? I've worked with, 2, 3, 4 other billing companies. They've either gone out of business, like you said, or they just, haven't treated my money, like my collections the way that they should. So they figure, let's bring it in-house. Well, a lot of those practice owners aren't in a position to bring it in-house. There's a lot of practices, I know you've had a lot of success over the years, like you mentioned, bringing it in-house and managing that. But that practice owner that just really, first of all, wants to run a profitable practice, they want to continue to focus on treating patients, growing their caseload without worrying about the collections, worrying about the next rule United Healthcare or Aetna or Cigna is going to roll out. And really, keeping a consistent, a focus on, again, growing caseload, treating patients, or having the ability to take a step back and actually focus on the business instead of in the business, and I think a lot of these practice owners are just so deep in the weeds and, their stress levels continue to increase week over week, month over month. Right. And, and they say, how is this, does this even make sense anymore? And those are the ones that really, I just hate to see you have some great clinicians, great business owners out there that are ready to just hang it up because they say reimbursements continue to decline. We can't do this anymore. And the reality is you really can if you have a very strong, billing and revenue cycle management process in place or team in place to help you get there. So, Cori, I don't know if you kind of.
No, that's exactly. I've had several calls in the last few weeks with those exact scenarios. And sometimes even like my biller just walked out on me, or gave me a 2-week notice. And we all know how hard it is to find good qualified staff. They try to hire somebody, but then they realize they just don't have the experience they need to efficiently run their practice for them.
Let me ask you guys a little more granular now. is there a threshold? Like I work with a lot of therapists that are just absolutely right out of the gate. They've never treated a Medicare beneficiary. They've never generated a claim. They are starting from nothing. They might've been therapists for 20 years, but they're just starting their business. And then I also speak to therapists that are like 1, 2 clinicians and maybe an admin person. They're sitting at around 300 to 500,000 in collections. They're looking to kind of grow the team and scale. They have the opportunity, but they don't have the infrastructure. Is there a minimum, maximum threshold for who you guys are working with these days?
No, short answer is no. You know, and those are always the ones that always are kind of, you know, interesting when people reach out and they say, oh, I'm not sure if I'm big enough to be able to work with you. You know, and we look at that. We said, I don't look. Some of our greatest success stories, you look at it from a practice startup that's doing several $1 million, you know, in collections now, over, and they've been able to focus on continuing to grow their business. So we don't look at it as practice startup versus established practices versus multi-location, multi-state. You know, I think now there's certainly different needs at those different stages, as you know, and but a lot of the things that we looked at is if that practice owner is, you know, willing to invest in continuing to grow their business, and that's what they want. If they're optimizing for that type of growth, then we can absolutely help them get there. You know, but I think that really, and you know, full transparency, I think starting off, there's a lot of technology that they may not, as a practice startup, they may not be may not make sense for them, or isn't something they need. But having a platform that's able to scale, so when they do get to that level, if they, you know, if that's what they're going for, then, you know, we can still continue to help them. So, but a lot of it comes down, not everyone, you know, for those that are optimizing for growth. And to your point, Tony, it's like that's another kind of, you know, group of practice owners that they're stuck in that location. They want to add 2 or 3. They have the ability, but they're afraid to do so because they feel like based on their current collection, their current AR, that's just going to compound, you know, and they won't be able to turn a real profit. So.
Yeah, you know, another element that's interesting, just before we jumped on this call, I had recorded a video. I've got it scheduled to publish. And one of the elements in the video was I said, you know, if you want me to turn something I love into something I hate, make me turn it into a business and then make my livelihood dependent on that business. So in other words, there are so many clinicians out there that are like, I love being a therapist. I love what I do. I'm really good at what I do. Patients are requesting to work with me, but I can't kind of do that working for someone else. So in their mind, they're thinking, okay, open a private practice. That's my only option to really expand and grow as a clinician. But then you guys know it. As soon as you make that switch, you're like, oh, wait a minute. I'm not a therapist anymore. Now I'm a business owner. Now I need to market. Now I need to hire. Now I need to fire and build systems and do all of these other things. And so again, when I go back to kind of the 20-year ago model of doing medical billing compared to today, I think you guys really kind of embody the partnership model rather than I'm hiring you to do my billing. It's like, okay, these guys are partners now. And in that partnership, you know, Paul, again, your CEO, posted something recently where he mentioned the very, very, very high collection rate that you guys have. And that's awesome. And so when I look at a therapist who says, okay, Medicare is cutting by 3.4% next year, they're looking to find margin. I really think a big part of finding that margin is improving efficiency, which you guys are better than most private practice owners are going to be at improving efficiency for billing, because that's what you do. And then freeing up my time and my staff's time so that we can focus on other things. You know, like right now within our organization. And if you remember back when we were working together, starting my physical therapy practice, it was like, okay, we used to outsource. Then we brought it in-house because it was more efficient with the technology of 2001 to do the billing in-house. I could spend $60,000, $70,000 on an in-house, you know, team to do my billing at that time. But now the technology has changed so much, has gotten so much better that even for me, I don't call myself a physical therapy clinic. I call myself a billing company that also does physical therapy, because the majority of our time is spent optimizing for billing and collections. That's the reality of it. And so even for me at this stage in 2023 compared to 2001, I would consider going back to outsource billing and collections, because it would free me up to spend more time on YouTube, spend more time building an audience, building a community, recruiting clinicians that are out there that really want to deliver the kind of quality care that I want my company known for delivering. So could you talk a little bit about that partnership and the fact that you guys have access and resources to information that a single owner operator doing their own billing in-house just doesn't have access to, like changes in regulations, changes in reimbursements, how to optimize, even just something as simple as a 59 modifier. Like, how do you view yourself as the partner for the business as opposed to just an outsourced billing company?
Yeah, and we talk a lot about that, Tony, and I think that's such an important piece of looking at it as a true partnership, and not just another billing company, not just another EMR company. And then you hope and pray that they communicate with each other. And I think for so many years over the past number of years that the industry has really looked. There's been so much fragmentation. There's been so much focus on integration. Do you integrate with that company, or do you integrate with And at the end of the day, we've looked at it. We came the other direction, as we talked about, and from built from the ground up to say, we're not going to continue to rely on integration beyond their connections with our clearinghouse and the payers, but and not looking at it as just another billing company, not just another EMR company. And I think that, again, that subtle but important difference is why we've been able to create really really build out the EMR platform as it is today, to be that billing aware, to really have just a seamless connection between the administrative side, the clinical side, the billing side of the business. And so, I think when we look at, in terms of companies that come into it, and we see it all the time. They come into it and say, we're starting, if it's a practice startup, or, hey, I just need to find my EMR, and Cori and I talk about it all the time of, it's like they're looking for the EMR first, and then from there, it's like billing's almost secondary, right? And they get getting paid part. And I've always, I've said for years that, I don't mean to trivialize it too much, but the EMR is really the easy part, in my opinion. I think, really where a lot of that complexity comes is keeping up with the payer changes, keeping up with the modifier changes, keeping up with, you look at what United Healthcare just did recently with all of a sudden bringing back time in and time out. And it's like, okay, do we just require now all of our therapists to document time in and time out, or do we leverage technology and put a payer rule in place to say, if a clinician opens up their clinical documentation, time in, time out, it's going to prompt them to complete it, because we know that United Healthcare has this patient policy. So it's that, that's one of many examples when you look at just being, again, leveraging technology. Because I think over the years, we've seen some of the best billers, and you could have a great biller in-house, or, but they're limited by the technology that they're using. And I think that's the difference of technology from the early 2000s to where technology is today, and really where it's going to be 10 years from now, right? I mean, I think a lot of that's going to continue to evolve at even faster pace. And with not to nerd out too much, but when you look at we talk about payer rules engine and a lot of the flexibility in there, that also starts at the credentialing level too. That each practice has different the ways they're contracted with payers, and based on that contracting, there's a whole credentialing, whole workflow in there to make sure we're not just submitting claims before we should, or making sure that certain payer rule requirements are on there. So again, that's where it all, again, using the EMR to help facilitate a clean claim process, that starts in the very, very beginning,
So I want to be mindful and respectful of your time. We've got about 5 more minutes. I would love to hear just kind of a general overview. What's the onboarding process look like in 2 scenarios? One, for the therapist who's just starting a new business, they don't have an EMR, they don't have any history, they're literally starting from scratch. What's it like? What's the time frame? Do you guys do credentialing or contracting with them, or how does that go? And then the second scenario is the therapist or business that's been in operation, they have some history behind them, but they're just not getting the service that they need, and they're looking to make a change. Kind of time frames and responsibilities, like how does that look?
Yeah, so I would say from an onboarding, and that was one of the things a couple of years ago, and this goes back to providing, making sure everybody's on the same page, our team, your team, the team that's coming on board, and having full transparency. Same thing on the reporting side, and one of the things we learned, many years ago is it was important to have a clear outline, and we created what we call an onboarding dashboard that shows, here are the different stages. to make sure I's are dotted, T's are crossed. Because again, that's another, I think so many of these practices have so much PTSD from previous migrations they've had and said, oh, my revenue came to a screeching halt for a month or 2 months, or I've heard it's much more than that. And it's like, holy smokes. So, one of the things that's super important to us, number one, is to make sure there's a clear outline, and that's all starts with that onboarding dashboard. Number two, on the customer service side, making sure that they've got a dedicated point of contact, that our onboarding managers walk them through and hear the state. Because at the end of the day, there's going to be questions, as they come up. Really the difference between a practice startup and an established practice, just to answer your question there, Tony, is practice startup, they're obviously not going to have, the bill, they're not going to have a lot of these contracts in place yet. Currently, we're not providing any credentialing services. We do put a lot of focus on making sure if they are pending, let's say their Medicare approval, or even a reassignment from certain therapists that they're bringing on board, or Blue Cross, any of the other approval, put different credentialing holds in place. That way they can start, if we're able to, since they can backdate their, for Medicare in particular, they can start treating patients, they can start documenting, they can even submit their charges. We put that into a kind of a holding tank there, wait till we get that P10 approval, and then we can flush all those claims through once we get the green light. So that's probably the biggest difference on an established up front. But the most important thing from an established is that when we pick a go live date, in average, people say, oh, how long is it going to take to get up and going, right? I would say on average, anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. And that's really not really it's more of a payer limitation, just kind of timeline. We'll get the account set up within about 24 to 48 hours, get that onboarding, they'll start an onboarding. But really the EDI, ERA, we handle all of the enrollments there. So that's another piece, depending on what clearinghouse they're on. Sometimes that's quicker than others. We work with 4 different clearinghouse partners, and really just making sure that the EDI, ERA enrollments are switched. It's going to take anywhere from 2 to 10 days, depending on the payer. So during that time, that's when we're working on, getting training set up, clinical training, admin training. Training on average is, initial 60 to 90 minutes on the clinical admin. And I would say at that point, 95% of practices are ready to hit the ground running. Now, there's always going to be questions, as in the first couple of weeks. That's part of it. But really, the most important thing for us, though, is that we set a go live date, that we're submitting claims on that go live date. That there is zero, we're not holding claim unless it's pending an 855 approval or something like that, that we are saying, hey, if we're going to start on December 1st, then we are submitting claims on December 1st, as long as your team is completing documentation and submitting charges over to us. So it really is, but a lot of it comes down to just being very transparent, being just very, we are not the company that's going to overpromise, underdeliver and say, hey, we can start you next week, because that's not reality, when it comes to managing EDI, ERA enrollments. And depending on the size of that practice, we've got practices that are multi-location, multi-state. There's a lot more that goes into it, obviously, than a single location. So, and then the last part I'll just add to that is really comes down to just managing, setting expectations with their team. If they run out, they know their team better than we do, in terms of what is that, managing the anxiety of going through a change and switching documentation. We try to make it as easy as possible, but change is change, right? So. I think a lot of that comes down to just managing expectations, and it starts with us laying out a clear plan through the onboarding dashboard and with that onboarding manager. So again, if you go on even more, go on more and more on that, but I think that's, making sure I's are dotted, T's are crossed, what we call the billing transition form. That's kind of sets the stage to say, hey, are we set up as, billing as a group? Are we billing as an individual? Are we, what is our credentialing status? And then figure out what that data migration based on the current platform is. And we help with that data migration process as well. So
that's awesome. And I know it's got to be so unique to each practice. With that being said, what is the best way for people to reach out to you? You and Cori, Adam and Cori, you guys are the main team that people would be connecting with? Yeah,
Cori, I'll let you go ahead and take that. So.
Yes, absolutely. Like you said, I am a clinician by background. I am an occupational therapist, and I have about 20 years of experience in operations. So it's been a lot of fun talking with the different therapists. So they can just reach out to our website, and they can schedule an appointment, book an appointment with me, and I'll do a demo and go over in detail Strata, and I can do a demo of the EMR and answer any questions they have.
Awesome. So what I'll do is I'll grab your guys' contact information. I'll put it in the description of the video and anywhere we share it. Cori, Adam, I just want to say thank you so much for spending this time on this morning and just kind of filling me in. You know, I think it's so great to see you guys really start to get the word out there. You've been in the background forever. I mean, and knowing where you came from, I really feel comfortable, confident knowing that there's a place for you in this market. And I'm so glad that you're getting the word out to the therapists who really need to hear it. So thank you guys for talking to me today.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having us, Tony.
Thank you,
All right.
Tony.